Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we are going to be looking at The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel Kolk. And specifically, we're going to be tackling parts 13, 14, and 15.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, so if you haven't read the book, I highly encourage you to pick up a copy. But
Yeah.
even if you haven't, we're going to really break down some of the key concepts and insights. And by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much better understanding of how trauma impacts not just the mind, but also the body.
That's right. You know, it's so easy to think of trauma as this purely psychological thing,
Right.
that it's all in your head. But Kolk really emphasizes how deeply intertwined trauma is with our physical selves.
Absolutely. And one of the first things that really jumped out at me in these chapters was this concept of heart rate variability, or HRV.
Oh, yeah, HRV, that's a good one.
Have you heard of this before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's basically a measure of the balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems.
Right. So like fight or flight versus rest and digest.
Exactly. It's like checking if your body's gas pedal and brakes are working in sync.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, and what Kolk found is that folks with PTSD often have low HRV,
Really?
which means that their systems are kind of stuck on high alert. It's like their brakes are a little bit faulty.
Wow. So their body's constantly in this state of like revved up, ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're always anticipating danger, even when there's no real threat present.
That's so interesting. And you know what's funny is I actually discovered I have low HRV too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It totally explains why I get so jittery before presentations.
Yeah.
You'd think after all these podcasts I do, I'd be used to it by now.
But, you know, presentations can be stressful even for seasoned podcasters.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're stuck with low HRV forever.
Okay, good. Because that was my next question. Like, what can you actually do about it?
Well, that's where some of these therapeutic approaches come in that we'll be talking about.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So let's dive into those therapies then, because one thing that really surprised me was that Kolk actually explored using yoga for PTSD.
Yoga.
And I have to admit, when I first read that, I was like, huh, yoga. That seems kind of like a stretch, pun intended.
Right. I get it. You usually think of yoga as, stretching and mindfulness and maybe a bit of spiritual stuff.
Exactly. How does that help with something as serious as PTSD?
Right. Well, there was a lot of skepticism initially, mostly because yoga hadn't been rigorously studied, in a scientific context.
Okay.
But then this yoga instructor, David Emerson, he reached out to the trauma center with this modified hatha yoga program, specifically designed for folks with PTSD.
Interesting. So it wasn't just like your typical yoga class?
No, no, no. It was tailored to address the specific needs of trauma survivors.
Wow. And that actually led to an NIH-funded study, right?
It did. It did. Kolk was really open to exploring new avenues, and this collaboration with Emerson really paid off.
That's amazing. And what did they find? Did the yoga actually help?
Oh, yeah. They found that this program, with its focus on, breathwork postures, mindfulness, it wasn't just about relaxation. It was really about helping people reconnect with their bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, because trauma can really cause that disconnect, right?
Exactly. It's like your body becomes the enemy almost, a source of danger instead of safety.
And yoga helps kind of rebuild that trust.
Yeah, it's like slowly starting to listen to your body's signals again without judgment.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
And I remember Kolk even talks about how some patients, they really struggle to relax, even the savasana, that corpse pose.
Oh, yeah. They were so used to being on guard, ready to fight or flee, that even lying still was a challenge.
Yeah, it's like their bodies were just stuck in that survival mode.
Yeah, exactly. Their nervous systems were just on high alert all the time.
And he mentions a patient, Annie, who found yoga terrifying at first. She said, quote, "Yoga is about looking inward instead of outward and listening to my body. And a lot of my survival has been geared around never doing those things," end quote. That's so powerful.
It really is. For someone who's experienced trauma, turning inward can feel really dangerous.
Yeah, it's like walking straight into the threat instead of running away from it.
Right. But the key is that yoga done in a safe and controlled environment can help rebuild that trust.
It's like gently dipping your toes back into the water.
Exactly. And that's where this concept of interoception comes in.
Interoception. What's that?
It's basically the ability to sense and interpret your body's internal signals. So things like your heartbeat, your breathing, your hunger cues.
Okay, so like being aware of what's going on inside your body.
Exactly. And trauma can really mess that up.
In what way?
Well, it can lead to something called alexithymia, which is basically the inability to recognize and describe your own emotions.
Oh, wow. So it's like the connection between what you're feeling in your body and what you're experiencing emotionally gets severed.
Exactly. And so you might be feeling all these sensations, but you don't know what they mean or how to express them.
That makes sense. And so yoga can help to kind of reestablish that connection.
Exactly. By helping you pay attention to your body and notice those subtle sensations, you can start to understand what they're telling you.
So it's not just about noticing the physical sensations, but understanding what they might be signaling about your emotional state.
Exactly. It's like learning a new language, the language of your body.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, and Kolk, he uses these phrases, notice that, and what happens next, both in therapy and in yoga.
Notice that. And what happens next?
It's about cultivating this curious observer within you without getting swept away by the intensity of those sensations.
I like that. Just noticing without judgment.
Exactly.
I've actually been trying to do that more in my own life, just noticing the sensations in my body without judging them, good or bad.
It's a great practice. It's amazing how much we tune out our own internal experience.
It's true. We're so busy focusing on the external world that we forget to pay attention to what's going on inside.
Yeah, and that internal world is just as important, especially when it comes to healing from trauma.
Absolutely. So we've talked about how trauma can affect our connection to our bodies. But Kolk also dives into how trauma impacts our inner world, our very sense of self. And that's where this concept of internal family systems, or IFS, comes in.
IFS. Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first heard about this, I was like, wait a minute. Are we talking about multiple personalities here? Because that's what I think of when I hear about, like, different parts of the self.
It's a little more nuanced than that. Think of it this way. Your mind isn't just this one single entity. It's more like a mosaic made up of different parts or sub-personalities.
Okay, so not multiple personalities, more like different aspects of our personality.
I bet we all have these different parts within us.
Okay, starting to get it. And so IFS specifically talks about three main types of parts, right?
Right. First, you have the exiles, which carry the pain and vulnerability of trauma. These are the parts that often get pushed away, hidden from view.
Okay, so like the wounded child within.
Exactly. Then there are the managers, which are all about control and self-preservation. They try to keep everything running smoothly and prevent further hurt.
So like the overachiever or the people pleaser.
Right. And finally, you have the firefighters, which emerge in a crisis to extinguish emotional pain, often through impulsive or destructive behaviors.
So like the addict or the self-saboteur.
Exactly.
Wow, so it's like we have this whole cast of characters living inside our head.
We do. And trauma throws these parts out of balance. Instead of working together harmoniously, they end up in conflict, creating a lot of inner turmoil.
So it's like an internal battle.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. And so the goal with IFS is not to get rid of these parts, but to learn to understand and integrate them.
Exactly. Each part is trying to protect us in its own way, even if its methods aren't always helpful.
Right. So it's not about eliminating these parts, but about recognizing their value and helping them work together more effectively.
Exactly. It's a much more compassionate approach to healing.
I love that. Instead of battling our inner demons, we learn to listen to them and work with them.
Exactly.
This is so fascinating.
Yeah, that's right.
I feel like I need to take a moment to just process all this.
That's a lot to take in.
But before we do that, I want to touch on one more point from this section of the book that really blew my mind.
Okay, what's that?
Kolk talks about this thing called neurofeedback.
Neurofeedback. Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Now, to me, this sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie. Is it really possible to rewire your brain with technology?
Well, it might sound futuristic, but the principles behind neurofeedback are actually pretty straightforward.
Okay, but how does it actually work? Is it like electroshock therapy or something?
No, nothing like that. It's completely non-invasive.
Okay, that's good to know.
Basically, sensors are placed on your scalp to measure your brainwave activity, and then you get real-time feedback on what's happening.
So it's kind of like biofeedback, where you learn to control things like your heart rate or muscle tension, but for your brain.
Exactly, but instead of focusing on physical processes, neurofeedback targets brainwave patterns.
Okay, so you learn to recognize those patterns, and then with practice, you can start to shift them.
Exactly.
So like if you're struggling with anxiety, you could learn to calm those overactive brainwaves.
That's one potential application. And what's really interesting is that Kolk ties this back to earlier research on ADHD. They found that slow brainwave activity in the frontal lobes was linked to ADHD symptoms. And that neurofeedback could actually help train the brain to produce faster, more focused brainwaves.
Oh, wow. So if neurofeedback can change brainwave patterns in ADHD, could it potentially help rewire the brain after trauma, too?
That's what Kolk explores in the book. And it's really promising.
This is all so mind-blowing. I have so many more questions, but I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have. We've talked about how trauma affects our bodies and minds in these really profound ways. And we've just scratched the surface of some incredible therapeutic approaches, from yoga to IFS to neurofeedback.
I know. It's a lot to take in, but it's also fascinating.
It is. And it really highlights how much we're still learning about trauma and how to heal from it.
And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. But don't go anywhere, because in part 2, we'll delve even deeper into how these therapies work and explore even more cutting-edge approaches. See you soon.
Welcome back. It's amazing how trauma can really leave us feeling like we're at war with ourselves.
Yeah, it's like this constant inner battle. And Kolk really dives into that in part 14 when he talks about those exiles, those parts of us that carry the deepest pain and shame from the trauma. It's like they've been locked away in some hidden corner of our minds.
It's a powerful image, and it speaks to how those raw, unprocessed emotions can just feel too overwhelming for our system. As we were discussing earlier, other parts, they step in to protect us from those exiles, but sometimes those protective mechanisms, they kind of backfire.
Right? Like he
Yeah.
talks about the managers trying to maintain control, and then the firefighters rush in to extinguish the emotional pain,
Yeah.
but often through these impulsive actions that don't always work out so well.
Right, and it creates this constant tug of war inside.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like with IFS, it's not about trying to silence or get rid of these parts, but more about acknowledging them and understanding their role in the whole system.
Exactly. None of these parts are inherently bad. They all developed as survival strategies. They were doing their best to navigate a world that felt unsafe.
So it's like they're all on the same team, ultimately.
They are. They're all trying to protect us in their own way.
That's a good way to look at it. And so Kolk talks about the importance of developing this self-leadership, where we can access this core of wisdom and compassion that can help guide our internal family.
Yes. It's like becoming a wise and compassionate leader for all those different parts of ourselves.
Right. Offering understanding and support to the parts that have been struggling in the shadows.
Exactly. And as we cultivate that self-leadership, we can start to unburden those exiles, to offer them the care and compassion that they've been longing for.
He mentions a patient, Peter, who initially seemed very arrogant and controlling. But underneath all that armor was a terrified little boy.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it, to think about those layers of protection built up over time.
It is, and it makes me wonder, what about those fundamental needs that were missed out on because of early trauma? It's one thing to process the traumatic memories, but how do you fill in those gaps, those missing pieces of early development?
That's such a crucial point. And it's something that Kolk addresses head-on in Part 18 when he talks about the power of structures in psychodrama therapy.
Structures. Can you explain what those are?
Yeah, so imagine creating a tangible three-dimensional representation of your inner world, using objects and people as stand-ins.
Okay, so it's like bringing your internal experience to life in a physical way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be so powerful for accessing those unconscious maps that we all carry within us.
And get this, you can actually revise the past within a structure.
You can.
It's like giving yourself a do-over, but for your emotional world.
Exactly. He talks about working with Maria, who struggled with the legacy of an abusive father and a passive mother. And through the structure, she was able to express her anger and grief, but also to create this ideal scenario where she felt loved and protected.
Wow. It's like giving your inner child a chance to finally experience that unconditional love and support that they may have missed out on.
Exactly. And by providing that corrective emotional experience, we can start to shift those deep-seated beliefs and patterns that hold us back.
That's so powerful. And he also talks about how structures can help us dare to tell the truth, to speak those things that have been silenced for too long.
It's an essential step in healing. By speaking our truth, we reclaim our agency and begin to create a more authentic and fulfilling life.
I love that. And it makes me think about neurofeedback again, because in a way, it's also about giving voice to those parts of ourselves that have been silenced.
It's true. Neurofeedback allows us to tune into those subtle signals from our nervous system that might be communicating things we're not even consciously aware of.
So it's like another way of accessing those hidden parts of ourselves.
Exactly. And by bringing those parts to light, we can start to understand them better and integrate them into our whole being.
It's such a beautiful way to think about it. And I think it really speaks to the interconnectedness of all these different approaches, from yoga and IFS to psychodrama and neurofeedback. They all point to this core message that healing from trauma is possible, and we all have the inner resources to reclaim our lives.
It's about remembering that we're not broken or damaged beyond repair.
Yeah, we're complex systems capable of profound growth and transformation.
And sometimes we just need a little help to tap into that potential.
Absolutely. But it's not always easy to access those inner resources,
Hmm.
especially when trauma has left you feeling overwhelmed and disconnected. So how do you even begin to tap into those resources when you're stuck in survival mode?
That's a really good question. And that's actually where Kolk brings up neurofeedback again. He dedicates a whole chapter to it as this cutting edge technology that can help rewire the brain and regulate the nervous system.
And I have to say that chapter was a real page turner for me. It's incredible how we can actually use technology to heal the impacts of trauma. It's like we're finally catching up to what ancient healing traditions have known all along, that the mind can heal the body and the body can heal the mind.
It's all about bridging that gap between the physical and the psychological, recognizing that they're not separate entities, but two sides of the same coin.
And neurofeedback gives us this tangible way to do that by providing feedback on our brainwave activity and teaching us how to consciously shift those patterns. It's like having a window into the inner workings of our brain.
Yeah, it's like holding up a mirror to the brain, allowing us to see those subconscious patterns that are driving our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
And, he talks about how trauma can disrupt those brainwave patterns,
Mm.
leading to problems with focus, emotional regulation, even sleep. It's like our brains get stuck in this state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for danger, even when we're safe.
Exactly, and neurofeedback can help retrain the brain, calming those overactive fear circuits and strengthening the areas responsible for executive function, emotional control, and relaxation.
He actually goes into detail about the different types of brain waves and how they relate to our mental states. He mentions delta waves, the slowest ones being associated with deep sleep. Then there are theta waves, which are linked to this dreamy, hypnagogic state. Alpha waves are associated with relaxed alertness, and beta waves are linked to focused attention.
It's fascinating how we can learn to consciously shift between these brainwave states with the help of neurofeedback.
Yeah, and he even shares some remarkable research on neurofeedback's effectiveness for a whole range of conditions, from PTSD and anxiety to addiction and ADHD.
One study that really stuck with me was the work of Eugene Peniston and Paul Kolkowski with Vietnam veterans who had chronic PTSD.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
They used this specific type of neurofeedback called alpha theta training, which helped these veterans access this deeply relaxed state where they could reprocess traumatic memories and create new, more positive associations.
And the results were astounding. Those veterans in the neurofeedback group showed significant and lasting reductions in PTSD symptoms, depression, anxiety, even physical complaints.
It's incredible, right? It wasn't just a temporary fix. Those positive changes stuck with them even after the treatment.
It really speaks to the potential for neurofeedback to create long-term shifts in the brain, not just temporary relief.
And it's not just for PTSD either. He even mentions a patient with a long-standing cocaine addiction whose cravings vanished after just a couple of neurofeedback sessions.
Seriously,
Yeah, it's amazing.
it's hard to believe something so powerful can be so simple.
It just goes to show how powerful neurofeedback can be in addressing those deep-rooted patterns of craving and compulsion that often drive addiction.
It's like hitting a reset button on the brain's reward system.
In a way, yes. But it's not just about treating specific conditions. Neurofeedback can also be used for performance enhancement. Helping athletes, musicians, even business executives improve focus, concentration, and creativity.
That's incredible. So it's not just about fixing what's broken, but about reaching our full potential.
Exactly. It's like giving the brain a tune-up, optimizing its function and unleashing its full potential.
This is all so exciting. It feels like we're on the cusp of a new era in mental health care, where we can combine these traditional therapies with cutting-edge technology to create more effective and lasting healing.
It's an incredibly promising time, for sure. But I do wonder about those who don't have access to these advanced therapies. What about people who can't afford neurofeedback or don't live near a practitioner trained in these techniques?
That's a really important point. These technologies are amazing, but they shouldn't be limited to a select few. We need to find ways to make them more accessible and affordable for everyone.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, it's important to remember that there are many other paths to healing that don't require expensive technology or specialized training.
Like what?
Well, Kolk talks about the power of communal rhythms and activities like yoga dance, even theater.
It's interesting you mentioned theater because he actually shares a personal story about how theater played a role in his own son's recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome.
Oh, yeah. I remember that story. It's amazing to think that something as simple as creative expression could have such a profound impact.
It speaks to the healing potential of embodiment and creative expression.
Exactly. It's not just about fixing the brain. It's about reclaiming our bodies, our voices, and our stories.
I've been thinking about my own experience with anxiety and how much it affects my body. The tightness in my chest, the shallow breathing. I've tried mindfulness and meditation, but maybe incorporating more movement and creative expression could help me reconnect with my body in a deeper way.
It's certainly worth exploring. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from those practices that allow us to move, express ourselves, and connect with others in a safe and supportive environment.
It's a reminder that healing isn't just a solo journey. We need connection, community, and creative outlets to truly thrive.
Absolutely. It's about remembering that we're more than our trauma. We're capable of experiencing joy, connection, and wholeness even after the most difficult experiences.
That's such a powerful message. And it leads us to the question, where do we go from here? How do we take all these incredible insights and turn them into action?
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll delve into practical steps you can take to incorporate these principles into your own life and continue your healing journey.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll wrap up our exploration of The Body Keeps the Score and discuss how you can begin to embody these transformative ideas in your everyday life. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered so much ground already talking about the impact of trauma and exploring all these different therapies, but what strikes me is this underlying current of hope and resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible how the human spirit can find ways to cope and even thrive in the face of such adversity.
Right. It's not just about understanding trauma, but about what we can actually do about it moving forward.
That's what Kolk really focuses on in the last section of The Body Keeps the Score. He wants to give people a sense of agency in their own healing process.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was his discussion of neurofeedback, which we've touched on before.
Yeah, neurofeedback, it's a game changer.
I have to admit, when I first heard about it, I was a little skeptical. Can you really rewire your brain with technology?
It does sound pretty futuristic, right?
But the more I learn about it, the more I'm convinced that we're just now catching up with what ancient traditions have known for centuries.
What do you mean?
That the mind can heal the body, and the body can heal the mind.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
And neurofeedback offers this tangible way to bridge that gap,
Right, by giving us that feedback on our brainwave activity and teaching us how to shift those patterns.
Exactly. Like it's literally holding up a mirror to your brain.
Right, you can see what's happening beneath the surface.
When he talks about how trauma can really disrupt those brainwave patterns,
Yeah.
leading to problems with focus, emotional regulation, even sleep.
Yeah, it's like your brain gets stuck in this hypervigilant state, always on guard, even when you're safe.
And neurofeedback can help retrain the brain to calm down those overactive fear circuits.
Exactly. It strengthens the areas responsible for executive function, emotional control, relaxation.
I remember he broke down the different types of brain waves and how they relate to our mental state. Like you have delta waves, the slowest ones associated with deep sleep.
Oh yeah, and then there's theta waves, which are linked to that dreamy, hypnagogic state.
Right, and then alpha waves associated with relaxed alertness.
And of course, beta waves for focused attention.
It's amazing how each of these brainwave states corresponds to such different ways of experiencing the world.
And what's really cool is that neurofeedback can help you learn to consciously shift between these states.
Right. And he highlights all this research on how effective it can be for all sorts of conditions like PTSD, anxiety, addiction, even ADHD.
One study that really stuck with me was the one with Vietnam veterans struggling with chronic PTSD.
Oh, yeah, the one where they used alpha-theta training?
That's the one. It helped them access this deeply relaxed state where they could actually reprocess traumatic memories and create new, more positive associations.
And the results were unbelievable. They had lasting reductions in their symptoms, like depression, anxiety, even physical complaints.
It's amazing to think that those positive changes continued even after the treatment ended.
Right. Shows just how powerful neurofeedback can be in creating long-term shifts in the brain.
And it's not just limited to PTSD either.
I know he even mentions a patient with a cocaine addiction whose cravings just vanished after a couple of neurofeedback sessions.
It's incredible how quickly it can work in some cases.
Like hitting a reset button on the brain's reward system.
Yeah, in a way, but it's not just about treating conditions either. Neurofeedback can be used to enhance performance too.
Oh, right, like for athletes or musicians.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can help them improve focus, concentration, creativity.
So it's not just about fixing what's broken, but about helping people reach their full potential.
It's like giving the brain A tune-up.
So we've got yoga, we've got IFS, we've got psychodrama, we've got neurofeedback. It feels like we're entering this new era of mental health care where we can blend these ancient practices with cutting-edge technology.
It's a really exciting time to be in this field, for sure.
But I also wonder about the accessibility of all this.
Right.
Not everyone can afford these high-tech treatments or find practitioners who are trained in these techniques.
That's a really important point, and it's something we need to be mindful of as these therapies become more widely available.
I'm hopeful that as the research continues and more people become aware of these approaches, they'll become more integrated into mainstream healthcare.
Me too. And in the meantime, there are so many valuable practices that are accessible to anyone, regardless of their income or location.
Like what?
Well, Van der Kolk talks about the power of things like communal rhythms, activities like yoga dance, even theater.
It's funny you should mention theater because he actually shares a really touching story about how theater helped his own son recover from chronic fatigue syndrome.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten about that.
It's amazing how something as simple as creative expression can have such a profound impact on healing.
It really speaks to the power of embodiment and finding your voice.
I've been thinking about my own struggles with anxiety and how much it affects my body.
In what way?
Like I get this tightness in my chest, my breathing gets shallow.
I hear.
I've tried mindfulness and meditation, but I'm wondering if maybe incorporating more movement and creative expression could help me connect with my body in a deeper way.
It's definitely worth exploring. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from those practices that allow us to move, to express ourselves, and connect with others in a safe and supportive environment.
It's a good reminder that healing is not a solo journey.
We need connection.
Right. Yeah.
We need community. We need those creative outlets to truly thrive.
And, ultimately, it's about remembering that we're more than just our trauma. We're capable of experiencing joy and connection and wholeness even after the most difficult experiences.
That's the message we need to hold on to, that healing is possible.
And that we all have the strength and resilience within us to move forward.
Exactly.
Well, it's been an incredible journey exploring The Body Keeps the Score with you.
I've really enjoyed it.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's been insightful and empowering, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and find what resonates with you on your own healing journey.